Tonight I'd like to discuss transformation, the nature of transformation. What does that mean in both a psychotherapeutic sense and the spiritual sense, and what is the common ground between those two ways of looking at personal evolution, personal growth? Transformation also corresponds to what I call the fourth step of integrative processing. The four steps are awareness, self-acceptance, direct experience, and transformation. Transformation, in terms of integrative processing and moving into the fourth and final step of it, means moving into a spiritual, if I may use that word, a spiritual kind of awareness of the emotion, of the situation that we've been processing. So let me describe a little further what I mean by spiritual awareness, first of all, and then we'll get back to what does transformation mean and how do we know whether we're experiencing it or not. A very important and powerful technique for moving into what you could call is spiritual awareness is the technique of witnessing. And this is a tool that I teach clients and that I've written about in the book in detail. Witnessing is a traditional meditative kind of exercise. It involves just watching impassively what's happening within your field of perception. Watching with no thought of commenting on, or no thought of changing, of making different, no judging. It's the simple act of just watching, just registering, just observing what's happening. And the nature of the witness is that as we do that, what we have to do prior to being in the witness state, in order to get to the witness state, is to relax our thoughts. It's the activity of the mind, the chatter of the mind, the constant thinking, looking into the future, looking back into the past. And often we have very legitimate needs that do have to be thought about. But what needs to be achieved is a balance between working with the mind, being immersed in the mind and in time, and being able to relax the mind at certain critical points, and that may be only for short periods each day, being able to relax the mind from its incessant goal orientation, from the striving that we seem to be incessantly wrapped up in as a culture today, possibly even more so than 10 years ago. It's the incessant goal orientation, the looking forward to things, the working towards things, the living in the future, moving into the future. It's that kind of orientation that prevents us from going into a deeper experience of ourselves in the moment. So when we see how our mind is acting in those ways of bringing us into the future, of the mind itself being very active, we calm the mind down and we're able to enter the witnessing function, the witness consciousness, just watching what's going on. Now, this doesn't mean that we're disabled from participating. In fact, it can mean that our ability to participate can be heightened. This is the kind of consciousness that the ancient disciplines, Zen and the art of archery, for example, Tai Chi, the meditation, all the meditation disciplines in general, have always wanted to move us towards the sense of witnessing, breaking the sense of identification. And this is the important thing to realize. It's breaking the sense of identification that we have with our physical world around us, our physical body, our emotional body, and even our thoughts. Part of the spiritual process, the spiritual path, is to recognize that we are not the same thing as our physical surroundings, Most of us can understand that, but we identify very closely with our body and also with possessions, with certain possessions. We do become linked to certain physical possessions. It's that attachment with the possession, the identification with it, just like we can identify with other people and like we identify with emotions and feelings. And when we identify with a feeling or with an emotion, usually it means that we're experiencing a sense of enmeshment with that feeling. Enmeshment means that we're so closely bound into the feeling that we are usually unconscious of the feeling, or of most of the feeling. We're so close to it that we don't see it, in other words. This is another way of describing what a suppressed feeling is. A suppressed feeling is something that we've pushed out of our view, pushed out of our consciousness, erected a kind of shielding, a kind of a blocking between ourselves and the feeling. So when we move into the witness consciousness, we're disidentifying ourselves with our possessions, our material universe, our physical body, and then our emotions. The emotions are the next body that we experience in terms of the traditional occult schematic of the way the bodies, the physical bodies, the physical, emotional, mental, intellectual, spiritual bodies all intertwine with each other. So we encounter the emotional body with which we are usually highly enmeshed. So as we start to witness our feelings without any sense of controlling them, and this is very important, that we don't try to control our feelings, but what we do control is our reaction to our feelings. So it's okay to allow yourself to have any feeling, and in a sense your feelings are always right, even though in another sense your feelings are always subjective as well. There's always a sense of projection onto a situation so that you're not really seeing things clearly. What you're seeing are the feelings that you're holding within, suppressed from previous times, that get projected onto present circumstances. So in order to release feelings and to use our life experiences as a catalyst, life brings us certain experiences, it brings up the feelings, and what we have to do is open to those feelings in ways that we've never really done before. We have to move into a sense of acceptance of those feelings. Now, the acceptance of the feelings and the witnessing of the feelings is what implies the spiritual perspective of the emotional work. But another important aspect of spiritual growth and transformation concerns the transcendence of opposites. And this is equally powerful and possibly even more realizable as we work on particular situations. What's important to recognize here is that any situation that we're confronted with is composed of two opposites usually. Let's say that we have a lot of anxiety and fear. Fear about our job, fear about money, fear about material survival, basically. So what happens is that when we experience that anxiety, our normal instinct, which is not always correct, our normal instinct propels us to strive for, to attain the circumstances, the material reality, which we think we need. And in many cases, we do have basic needs. Of course, we do need things to a certain level. We do need a job, of course. We do need an income. We have to survive. But what happens is that because the anxiety and the survival fear has built up to such a great extent over the past, we become compulsive about seeking out what we think is going to compensate for our survival fear. And what happens is that as we attain those things, we gain more material security. Let's just say we get more money. But what happens is that usually whatever we get in order to compensate for the negative experience, for the anxiety experience, never seems to really satisfy us. Aside from just satisfying and covering us in a very basic level. See, we're dealing with a compulsive craving. And it's not only on the survival level, it can be on a sexual level, or a recognition level, or a love level. And also on a creative expression level, we can be compulsive about creating as artists. And no matter how much recognition we get or creative success we get, we're still never really satisfied. What's happening is that we're allowing the negative side. It's all these negative experiences of these negative emotions. We get compelled by these negative emotions into seeking out what we think is going to solve them, release them, make them better. But because they're compulsive, the seeking out and the attaining of what apparently is the opposite, it never really satisfies the emotion. It never satisfies the craving, the compulsive craving. And if you look at yourself and if you look at people around you, I think you would recognize the truth of this. If we're experiencing loneliness, if it's built up and if it's compulsive, no matter who we're with, no matter who we keep seeking out, that loneliness is never really fixed, except maybe in the most superficial way at the beginning of a relationship because of the newness of the relationship. But what happens is that newness wears off very quickly. We then start experiencing anxiety from the suppressed loneliness that keeps coming up, and we think we need a new relationship, basically. It's just that no relationship is ever really going to satisfy the deep, compulsive craving that we're experiencing. So that compulsiveness, and compulsiveness exists whenever there's been a suppressed, whenever a suppressed feeling has been allowed to accumulate from the past. Suppressed loneliness, suppressed anxiety, suppressed need for recognition, suppressed sexual frustration, suppressed depression. Whenever we go for things to satisfy those negative feelings, it never really works. So that's what I as a therapist do with clients, is we approach the negative feeling directly. And we work with that negative feeling directly, releasing it directly through all the techniques that we're talking about in this series. And once the feeling is released through therapy or self-therapy, if you're working on your own, there's no longer any need to be compulsive. We're no longer driven, basically, after success or money or relationships. It doesn't mean that we don't have those things, obviously. It just means that we're not compulsive about them, we're not attached. But in order to get to that non-attached place, it means releasing the feeling, the negative feeling directly. And then what happens is that as the negative feeling is released of any particular dualistic experience, see what all these things are that I've been describing are dualistic experiences, the negative and the positive. We're immersed in the negative, so we go for the positive, thinking it's going to solve the negative, but it doesn't. That's a dualistic experience. As we integrate the negative directly and release the negative feeling directly, we experience integration of the dualistic experience. Integration means that we're no longer being driven compulsively. And we experience a transcendence of this particular dualistic experience. We're no longer hung up in it. So once you integrate the dualistic experience, you transcend it. You no longer have a need to attract that kind of negativity on whatever level it is. That's psychological growth. That's a very definite way of understanding what psychological growth is. You're no longer compulsively seeking. And I believe it's possible to use that approach in any stage of psychological growth. There's always a dualistic kind of hang-up. And as we integrate, as we become more aware of what the opposites really are, and usually we're not conscious of those. We're not conscious of how we're being motivated by a negative feeling after something because we think it's going to satisfy the negative. When we become conscious of how we're wrapped up in that dualistic rat race, then we can start working with it. We integrate the negative side directly, we clear the feeling, and we grow past that particular plane. So we're nearing the end of the show today. I'd like you to explore right now with me the things that we've discussed during the show. Just sit quietly if you'd care to. Sit up straight without leaning back. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing that. And move into the witness. In the book I give some techniques for entering the witness, which I think would be hard to do on TV, but they involve visualizations, bringing you through even physiological triggers into a witnessing capacity. But for now, just watch your surroundings, yourself, your emotional self. Just watch as if you're watching from a detached place, not a place of denial. You're opening, you're accepting, you're experiencing, you're opening yourself to full experience of whatever feeling you've chosen to work with right now. But you're just witnessing that feeling, watching it in a detached way with complete acceptance and non-judgmentalness. No judgment, no condemnation, setting aside all sense of priority, even all sense of personal agenda. Setting aside personal preferences is a very important part of spiritual growth, corresponds to opening yourself to grace. And then as you keep moving into your meditation, you can open yourself to an understanding of how is this experience a dualistic manifestation? How am I being driven by the negative into compulsive striving after the positive? And how can I free myself from that by opening to and clearing the negative directly?